Good morning. I don't speak Portuguese, so if you need translation, please settle yourself in. I'm very pleased to be here. I was a bit late, but thank you for accommodating the program. What I want to do with you today is basically look at the state of the world, look at the role that I see business play in making the world sustainable, and talk a bit about how are we going to change pace, and how are we going to scale up what is needed in the world. Let's see if we can get my slides to work. Great. Thank you. I'm Peter. I'm relatively new to the World Business Council. I started 9 months ago. Before that, I was with TNT, big global transport company, as their CEO. And if you look at planes like this is really a great sign of the world we have built. We have built a world of globalization. I know many of the companies in the room today have activities spread all across the world. And if you're the CEO of a transport company, by definition, your activities go all over the globe. So globalization for a transport company is you fly a plane from your airport in Europe to the airports in China. You fill them with the new iPhones and you bring those back. And the first day you buy a Boeing 747 is a pretty cool day. You know, it's like, wow, big machine. But there is another way to look at these big machines. So when TNT owned 2 Boeing 747s, after about a year into operations, these 2 machines can do 9 rotations between Europe and China. So 9 rounds, flying empty to China, coming back totally filled with iPhones and iPads and all the other things that people make in China these days. And then we came to the realization that 2 planes doing 9 rotations a week between Europe and China burn as much CO2 as all 35,000 trucks and vans of TNT in that same week did burn. And this is a completely different perspective on globalization. It is okay to make our supply chains long, but the carbon intensity of them cannot be underestimated. And I still meet many people who then come and say, well, if only we had better technology, technology is going to save the world. I've come to the conclusion after a few years at TNT that that's not true. Is anybody in this room driving a Toyota Prius? Or are you still in big, ugly, 8-cylinder gas guzzling cars here? I don't know. I didn't see too many on the streets, but okay, you've heard of the Toyota Prius. It's a hybrid vehicle. In a Toyota Prius, you can get about 22 kilometers out of 1 liter of gas, if you drive the car the way it is intended. But if you have a stressy day, like I was this morning, being a little bit late in traffic, or you have a fight at home, you can also get only 10 kilometers out of 1 liter in the same car. And it's an advanced car, but it can't read your mood. So the only difference is your mindset connecting to the right food, spilling too much gas. So my absolute lesson from 10 years at the helm at CEO is it's good to think about technology, but if we forget the mindsets of our employees, or the mindsets of our customers, or the mindsets of our suppliers, we're never going to make the world sustainable. Well, I think most of you know WBCSD, the World Business Council. It's a great honor for me to be here in Portugal today, because the Portuguese BCSD is by far one of our best BCSDs anywhere. So we've been long-standing partners, and we're very proud of it. Many of you are members at the World Business Council of your companies. Many of you are employed by subsidiaries of global members of ours, so I think I don't need to spend too much time. Let me talk about the state of the world. Sustainability is not a new thing. If we're honest about it, we started talking about it in 1970, when the Club of Rome came out with a publication called The Limits to Growth. It was a big meeting in Stockholm in 72, followed by a meeting 20 years later in Rio, which became kind of famous, the first Earth Summit. And in that Earth Summit, there was a book discussed or came out, was the Agenda 21. And I don't know if many of you will have ever looked at that particular publication, but if you do, you will see how incredibly accurate that book still is. All the topics that were raised there, all the challenges that the world is facing and were recognized to be facing then, we are still facing today. The only difference is many of these challenges has become a lot more urgent. So we've been at this as a world, as all the citizens on the planet, for 40 and seriously for 20 years. So what is the progress we're making is a reasonable question. We live in a world where every 6 seconds a child dies from hunger. And this is 6 seconds. And again, in 6 seconds, another one will die. 18,000 children die each day from hunger. It's no more in the newspaper, but it happens every day. Every 12 seconds, a child dies from lack of sanitation, from contamination, because there's no clean drinking water and sanitation available. So poverty is still as urgent an issue as it has ever been. Environmental damage is continuing at a pace that is very hard to believe and understand. And the emissions continue to increase, and that is becoming quite an urgent issue. In the run-up to Copenhagen, now 3 or 4 years ago, the IPCC for the first time came out with a very strong message saying CO2 is a problem, it's driving climate change, and it is the human interventions that are one of the main causes for it. Copenhagen was not successful in bringing action to the world, and since then the scientists have been discredited somewhat. But much more recently, November last year, the IEA, the International Energy Agency based in Paris, published a very interesting report, which I don't think got the public attention that it deserved. But in that report, the engineers of the IEA had made a calculation. If the world is building all the CO2 emitting installations that the world is planning to build, then in 2017, 5 years away, the world will lock itself into a 5-degree warming scenario. And, you know, you've heard it well. The UNFCCC climate change negotiations still talk about 2-degree warming scenarios. That is not going to happen. 5-degree is a very realistic scenario. And that means that topics like adaptation need to become much, much higher on our agendas, whether we like it or not. And of course, a big part of all of this and this pressure on the planet is this continuous increase in population. We've hit 7 billion people about half a year ago. We will continue to grow to close to 10 billion people in 2050. And not only will the population go from 7 to 10 billion, which is already quite an additional impact on the planet, also we expect that the middle class consumer will grow from 2 to possibly 5 billion people on the planet. So there will be many more mouths to be fed, and there will be many more consumers that will want to consume. And there's always a big dilemma when you're a business organization, because what is bad about 2 billion to 5 billion consumers? There's lots of growth opportunities, great products, good growth for revenues and stuff that we can all sell to these people. But we live in a world which is resource constrained. We are beginning to see in some areas that there are limits to the resources, whether it's raw materials, whether it is becoming more difficult to get to some of those raw materials, or whether it's the emissions and pollution that producing these materials will cost. So about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, WBCSD published a book called Vision 2050. Some of you will have seen it. I know you guys have been heavily involved in customizing it for your market. But what that book said, besides the Vision 2050 and where we needed to go to make the world sustainable, is that the first 10 years of the period towards 2050 would be called the turbulent teens. So what I did is I took a couple of photos of what has happened to the world since this book 2.5 years ago was published, and it is quite shocking. Weather patterns are now really shifting. We're no longer talking about are the models of scientists right or wrong, or conservative or not. All we need to do is read the newspapers and see what is happening to the world. Major droughts in the Midwest of America causing food crops to go down, driving commodity prices up. Even in India, the monsoon has not been producing the rains that it normally does. Arctic melting at record levels. I don't know if you heard the latest. In 4 years from now, there will be no more ice in the Arctic. It will all melt in the summer. And that means that the reflective power of the Arctic, the ability of the Arctic to reflect back the heat from the sun into the universe, is disappearing, which will only accelerate the global warming on our ground. There has been more and more natural disasters. This here is a picture of Japan with an earthquake causing significant trouble in the eastern coast of Japan. 6 months later, massive floods in Thailand, disrupting many of the automotive supply chains. Again, all calls for adaptation. And Japan actually is the best example, because this particular earthquake happened in March of 2011. Before that earthquake, 32% of energy in Japan came from nuclear production. Today, that's 2%. So 30% energy production has fallen away. And whether that's the right or the wrong choice, we will probably all have different views. But all it means is that in case of severe weather or other natural events, the adaptation of our infrastructure will become an ever bigger topic on our agendas. And if this was not stress enough, the economic system is also under severe pressure, as unfortunately you here in Portugal experienced firsthand, or your neighbor country, Spain, where the protests from young people unable to find jobs are becoming noisier, and rightly so, because what is the future that all of us can produce for these kids? The euro crisis continues. The level of bankruptcy, particularly in small and mid-sized companies, is continuing to increase. I've already said food commodity prices are threatening to reach a new peak, particularly causing trouble for all the poor people around. So it's no wonder you get movements like Occupy to stand up. It's no wonder that Spanish people protest, or Greek had its riots yesterday. It is very hard for people to see where the leadership is that is going to take us out of this. And in some places, like the Arab Spring, the revolution is just happening. So it is a world where environmentally the pressures and the stress is really accelerating. The economic pressures are accelerating, and all that combined make for a social tension that is something we need to very, very carefully manage. And business, from our point of view, needs to think hard what our role is in taking that forward. So about 3 months ago, everybody again came together in a Rio. So this was called Rio Plus 20 years later. I don't hope there is anybody representing the UN in the room, because I'm going to say something which in the UN world is not allowed to be said. But Rio was a complete failure. The UN thinks it was okay that we had a document, and it was okay that we had a document. So the Brazilian government did really well to get a document that at least offers some hooks for going forward, but in no way did that document or the actions written down in that document take into account the urgency of social or environmental pressures that are currently up in the world. There was some really good highlights in Rio. 20 years ago, in '92, there were a handful of business leaders. In '92, when you read the documents, you cannot find the word business or private sector or corporations as part of the solutions. Business was then seen as being the major problem in the world. And that is changing rapidly. Today, in Rio, 3 months ago, there were 1,300 business leaders. There were many side events where governments and business leaders and leaders from the NGO community came together and were working collaboratively towards solutions. In the outcome document of Rio, as insufficient as it was, there were many, many mentions of business and the role that business will play in solving or dealing with some of the challenges of the world. So what I've written in one of my reviews of Rio this year is that when Rio plus 40 comes around, so I'm really pleased to see so many of the young leaders in the room, because you guys will be going to Rio plus 40. When Rio plus 40 comes around, my hope and my expectation is that we will all look back at Rio plus 20 saying that's where business took over and started scaling up the solutions that the world needs. So it's a big ask. So, I would not be running WBCSD if I did not believe that business was going to be the major provider and implementer of solutions for the world challenges. And I'm not stupid. I don't say that business will do it on its own. We need to work very closely with governments. We need to work very closely with civil societies. But it is the innovation power, the financial power, it is the management power of business that will have to take the lead. So in this Vision 2050, I've now talked about it a few times, we have defined what is sustainability. And it's always good to remind ourselves, because sustainability these days has become such a hot topic and everybody talks about it, but do we talk the same thing? So this is what we mean when we talk sustainability. We're going to move to a world where there's 9+ billion, maybe 10 billion people in 2050. We think they all need to live well, and together we need to come within the boundaries of the planet. So this definition holds kind of 3 elements. It caters for the growth from 7 to 9+. It means that we all need to live well, which probably doesn't mean that they all get to wear the same suits that I wear. But as a minimum, we don't want people dying from hunger. We want people to have access to education, to healthcare at an affordable level. That's the minimum standard we should strive for. And that is basically the best way to eradicate poverty. The last bit is going to be the most challenging one, and that is how do we get the planet back within the boundaries? Because today, all citizens on the planet use 1.4 times the resources in 1 year that the planet can renew in that same year. If all the people in the world would live like Americans live, we would need 6 planets. If all people in the world lived the way Europeans live, we would need 4 planets. We don't have 4 planets, we only have 1. And we're going to grow from 7 to 9. We're going to take middle class from 2 to 4 or 5 billion. So there's enormous pressures on resources. So I guess today, if you want to remember only one word from this whole speech of mine, is that you are now, at this precise moment, at the shift from labor productivity, which has been the main focus for business so far, to resource productivity in the future. So we're going to go and have to manage our resources smarter, get more out of them, and do longer with them. And that's already laid down for a big part in Vision 2050. So the vision is behind me on the screen. The words are way too small for you all to read. But the words that are surrounding the thing, the circle around it, are basically the elements of the vision as we see the world in 2050. And in many of those words, you find the word low carbon, meaning more renewables, less fossil fuels. You see things like basic needs should be met. And you see a thing like true value, and I get to talk about that a little bit later. It is not an alien thing for business. I said in '92 there were no business leaders in Rio, but soon after the 90s, business started with their CSR programs. Initially, many of those were what I call philanthropic, business connecting up with some kind of a good cause, giving money, giving time, and trying to help that good cause make progress. More recently, you see companies truly integrate sustainability into their core strategies, into the way that business is being run. The example I always hold up high is Unilever. Unilever has published a strategy a year ago called The Living Planet, in which it says that in the strategic period, it will double the size of the company. So in the next 10 years, Unilever wants to be twice as big as they are today, which I still think is a little bit of the silly old macho projections. We're going to be twice as big. But at the same time, Unilever says we will halve the amount of resources that we use. And that is a breakthrough, because that's no longer just a CSR department somewhere at the head office coming up with nice plans. That means every process, every management layer, every part of their global operations has to come up with new solutions. The big trick in the world is going to be, how do we make everybody think this way? How do we get all the companies to integrate sustainability in the core of their strategies and their management? And there are enormous amounts of great examples out there. I think EDP, your utility company here, published a report this or last week saying you're making real money in renewable energy, which is great because there is still this big question, is it possible to make money in renewable energy? Brisa, in some of its projects in North America, being very intensely involved in solar energy. Holcim, Swiss cement company, looking at how do we restore the quarries after we have taken the cement out of the ground. PepsiCo, another example. PepsiCo, you think of Coca-Cola, well, PepsiCola in their case, I think, but the drink. They have completely invested in ways to go direct seeding in rice, reducing the water need by up to 50%, significantly enhancing the income for farmers. In the heavier industries, there's great examples. Simpor, the Portuguese cement company here, reusing the excess cement in their operations and turning it back into the components which you require to make cement, significantly reducing the water footprint of the activities. Tires being used tires being used as fuel for cement kilns. So there's all kind of examples. I could fill an hour of presentation with pictures like it. The problem, however, and this is a message not everybody in this room likes, because some of us are really proud of the things we're doing, I have come to conclude that if I add all the examples up, if all the pictures in the world of all the great things and solutions that business are beginning to roll out, it's still not enough to make the world sustainable. So the big question we all need to focus on, how are we going to scale up and how are we going to speed up the implementation? So when I was in Rio, I was asked to make a brief speech to the heads of states on behalf of all business, which I did. So I told the global leaders the following. I said, we all know why we are here. They all knew why they were in Rio. You all know why you're here in Estoril. We all know what we need to do. Maybe not in finite detail, but if you put a few young leaders of the future in a room, they'll cook up the plans of how do we make our business more sustainable. We certainly know when we need to do it, which is now. Not tomorrow, not in 5 years, but now. And that's actually great news. Because if a business person is in an environment where the why, the what, and the when is figured out, all we need to worry about is how are we going to do it? And that is going to be the major theme in sustainability in the next few years. How are we going to scale up the solutions that we have identified? How can we speed up the implementation? What are the policies that will accelerate that? And all that combined gives us a chance of making it. And if you want to know what is the most powerful idea around that is going to make a big difference, it is this one. Traditionally, business manages its financial capital. When I talk about ROCE, return on capital employed, or ROE, or ROS, or EBITDA, there's nobody in this room who doesn't know what I'm talking about. We all drive live and dream and are educated in words around our financial capital. We know how to optimize our capital. We are capitalists, most of us. So I was in Jeju in the World Conservation Congress 2 weeks ago, a room full, I think 2,500, I call them hippies, conservationists, very nice people, by the way, but tree huggers and those type of. And so I said to them, I am a capitalist, which in a room like that is a pretty courageous thing to open your speech with. But let me explain to you what a capitalist is. Because a capitalist is a person who puts capital to work and expects something back. So we deploy capital and we want something in return, which is the return on capital we always talk about. The only mistake we've all collectively made is that you have asked us to only optimize the return on the financial capital. So where we need to go to in the future is very simple. There is natural capital. The hippies call that ecosystem and biodiversity. There is social capital, the people, the employment, the poverty eradication targets. And we capitalists must learn to manage all three of them. And the way we're going to do that is true value, true cost, true pricing. So this is debates about how do we measure good performance in the business? Is financial profit alone the right measure, or should it be the EP&L as Puma has recently launched it, or are there other alternatives? And these are really going to be the big debates in the sustainability space of the future. So what is WBCSD doing about it? We have our Vision 2050. We need to align it with these three capitals, the financial, the social, the natural. Traditionally, I think WBCSD has done a lot of work on natural capital, whether it's energy and climate, forest solutions. There's all kinds of examples of that great work. We can do more on the social capital, particularly also focusing that more in the OECD countries, given the rise of youth unemployment. We need to link that to the scientific community. The scientists have developed a model called the planetary boundaries, which tell us where the priorities are. Nitrogen, water, and CO2 are the key elements of the planet that are in stress. That's where we need to find solutions first. And lastly, we, business, need to take a leading role in designing the reporting of the future. Some of you might have heard of integrated reporting. Some of you will have heard of natural capital accounting. It all comes down to how will we manage as a capitalist, not only the financial capital, but the financial, the natural, and the social capital. And in that journey, which on my more courageous days I would have called a revolution, I look so much forward to work together with Portugal, with all of you, with the young leaders of the future, and we're going to have to save the world, and we're going to have to do it fast. Thank you.